More than 1,000 Christian conservatives gathered in Des Moines, Iowa on Friday to hear from Republican leaders about their party's future. The annual Family Leadership Summit featured remarks from former Vice President Mike Pence, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem. Each focused largely on their own accomplishments while holding office and were all critical of the current administration. Though none have announced any plan on running for president in 2024, the Boston Globe reports that some past supporters of former President Trump who attended the event may be ready to move on and see what comes next for the Republican Party. James Pindell is a reporter for the Boston Globe and has been following this story and joins us now. James, very happy to have you here. So, what did attendees tell you about why they think it might be time to move the Republican Party in a different direction?
I think this whole concept is very surprising to a lot of us. Obviously, very surprising to me. I originally pitched the idea of going out to Iowa and covering a completely opposite story of what ended up emerging. I think we can all understand, Donald Trump is poll after poll after poll, and if you talk to folks, is very much beloved among the Republican base. And if you ask who would they vote for president in 2024, they say Donald Trump overwhelmingly. But there's a nuance. I went there to cover that story. What is it like to be Mike Pence, a former vice president, a former Secretary of State of Mike Pompeo, a governor in Kristi Noem, trying to run for president in any other field would be an incredible candidate, with Donald Trump looming out there. That was what I thought the story was. But then when you start on the ground, you start talking to folks, the first person would say, I hope he doesn't run again. Second person says, I hope he doesn't run again. The third person says he doesn't run again. It's like, wait a minute. So then I decided, kind of scrapped any preconceived notions of what I thought was happening in Iowa, and started just listening to folks. And 15 in a row said no. In the end of the day, would they vote for Donald Trump? Yes. Do they hope he runs? No. They're ready to move on.
Right. So let's talk about some of those folks that are ready to move on. You spoke to some of them. A Des Moines Register MediaCom poll last month appeared to show otherwise, James. It found that 84% of Iowa Republicans said they'd likely vote for Trump again as president. But explain why that might be, and explain perhaps the calculus that some in the Republican Party, like, for example, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, or others, are making as they sniff around Iowa.
Yeah, that poll is entirely consistent with what these same folks told me. If you put it on a question, would you vote for Donald Trump again? They will say yes. If you ask them a different question, do you want him to run? They say no. So that's the nuanced difference. And that's why it was very surprising to see. Look, many of them said they would like a kinder, gentler version of Donald Trump. Many people said that they thought that it wouldn't be good for Donald Trump to run again for him personally, and it wouldn't be good for the country for him to run personally. So this was, a very fascinating thing. But yes, poll after poll says exactly what that Des Moines Register poll says, but there is definitely a nuance here. And in terms of other folks think about running for president, look, we had 17 people run for president in 2016 on the Republican side. We had 23 Democrats run in 2020. This time we're looking at around 20, maybe even 25 Republicans running, particularly if Donald Trump does not run. And a lot of people do the little early campaigning going on, if you even want to call it that, accepts that premise. So there's a lot of incentive to get out there early to these early states to get a leg up on maybe 24 other candidates if Trump doesn't pull the trigger.
I'm wondering how much of this, what you've observed, has to do with the fact that this was a gathering of Christian Republicans versus Republicans in general, which is what that poll sort of indicates. Because I think about, the Christian leaders who lined up to support the former president during his campaign and who may have dialed back their support a little bit now or are no longer as influential as they were before. And I'm kind of thinking of Franklin Graham, Billy Graham's son, who has talked about how watching the assault assault on the Capitol was very disturbing for him, and he seems to have sort of toned down his support. Or Jerry Falwell Jr., who's no longer running Liberty University, but was at the time able to really marshal the numbers and the influence of Liberty University to help to co-sign on Donald Trump as a candidate for evangelicals. The fact that some of these leaders have kind of stepped back a little, do you think that's having an impact on the way Christians view their support for the former president?
It's a great question. I mean, look, this is a group of folks who did not support Donald Trump in the Iowa caucuses in 2016. They supported Ted Cruz, or they supported Ben Carson, or others who may be more aligned with their evangelical beliefs. However, once Donald Trump became the nominee, even around Super Tuesday in 2016, they caught on to the Trump train, and then this has been the greatest in terms of the biggest political base alliance that Donald Trump ever had. But you're right. I think we're starting to see some cracks to that, and I think evidence to that was what we saw in this Iowa summit over the weekend. Obviously, I went with the entire premise that this was the base of the base in the kickoff state. And what does it look like? And right now, it looks like that they're not waiting around for Trump. And in fact, they're saying, could you just not do this so I don't have to have a choice?
Yeah, it's such interesting research there, James, because, the way that the question is framed and the way you pointed out to me can have a large impact on how people see the future of the Republican Party. And the question, of course, is this family leadership summit is often seen as the first political event on the road to the 2024 Republican primary. You know that. But I also wonder when you start to poll suburbanites, suburban women, people of color, and where former President Trump sort of lines up with that. And that may be what somebody like Mike Pence or Ron DeSantis or Ted Cruz even is looking at, that weakening. So if you're seeing the weakening numbers with the folks that make up this constituency, you can almost be sure that the support is weakening or eroding in these other constituencies, and maybe that's what some of these other candidates are probably thinking about. So talk to us about who those notable names, those potential other candidates who were in attendance.
Yeah, well, just to follow up what you just said, we have actual evidence here. Now, look, polls are polls, and we've had a lot of criticism of polls in the last few cycles, but the same one you cite in the Des Moines Register among Iowa voters. I mean, this is a state that Donald Trump won twice. He won by 9 points just last year. And yet his approval rating overall, not just the hardcore evangelical, but overall in Iowa, is something around 39%. Joe Biden would beat him right now in Iowa, a state he won twice. So yes, there are some. Donald Trump is not. He's not doing well right now in terms of how he's fading anyway. So overall, but in terms of names, again, we may have 24 people running for president right now. If it's not Donald Trump, the early money is that Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, is looking really well. Though I will caution you, this is my 7th presidential primary season. Before Donald Trump emerged, we were at this point discussing who would the Republican nominee be. Is it Kristi or Rand Paul? Those are the two folks who were leading this. Years before that, it was Rudy Giuliani. Of course, neither one of them even became the nominee. So it's very, very early. But we do have a lot of names. Folks, Tom Cotton was in New Hampshire over the weekend. He's a senator from Arkansas, has been looking at this. But many governors, many senators, Florida may have multiple candidates, not just Ron DeSantis, but both senators, Rick Scott and Marco Rubio, are visiting Iowa and New Hampshire. Marco Rubio just announced he's going to be visiting Iowa in the next few weeks. Rick Scott's, I think, there in a couple weeks. He's going to be in New Hampshire also in a couple weeks. And then Matt Gaetz was thinking about it before he had all his problems. So, I mean, you have multiple folks thinking about this run. But I am fascinated. Nikki Haley was just there and had a very successful trip speaking to the Iowa Republican Party fundraiser. But where Republicans go from here, where you can both, it seems to be framed of either you're going to be a Trump candidate or you're not going to be a Trump candidate. And then you have all these folks trying to blend in the middle. The fact that you don't have lanes right now is actually a very fascinating thing in American politics, where typically you would say, this is the base candidate, this is the one who's going to argue they're the most flexible, could raise the most money, they're the establishment candidate. We don't have any of that right now. It's kind of off script, and we're kind of waiting for Donald Trump to make a decision.
All right. James Pindell, thank you very, very much. Really fascinating research and reporting. Appreciate it.
Thank you.